My name's Tyler Boswell. I am a somewhat new generative artist. I got started uh, about 2 years ago. I've always been a coder. I went to school for computer science um, and always been interested in design and art, but was never very good at it. So I kind of stumbled upon generative art a few years ago. There was a course by Matt Delorier on front-end masters, which I got through my job at the time. So it was a course all about creative coding, and I had no idea what that was and just decided to watch it. And it really introduced me to this whole field that I didn't know had existed for decades. Pretty quickly got into it, discovered things like FX hash, and yeah, that's pretty much the story about how I got into all this stuff. I've always been into art, but I was never like a art student or really studied art in the past. So I have, I guess, influences in that way that I've looked at art and always liked it, but not like really studied single artists or any specific mediums other than creative coding. So really other generative artists are what inspire me a lot because I'll see something that they do and wonder how they did something, and that kind of motivates me to try and figure out either how they did that or just motivates me to try other things that people haven't done yet in generative works. But yeah, I've always been into digital art. Like I mentioned, I used to play around with Photoshop, um, and I always thought it was fun, but really wasn't getting the results I really wanted. And I think creative coding and being able to just add so much randomness and get new outputs is really unique and different than other types of art. So that alone is like what makes it fun for me. Like I can go back to an old project and just make new outputs, and it's something totally new. And that's not something you can do with any other art form, really.
Was generative art kind of the first aesthetic or the first kind of system that you explored when it comes to creative coding, or was there something else, or did you kind of have a journey that led to this?
Yeah, it was definitely the first really to like code-based work. I had played with things like Photoshop as a kid and thought about getting into game design, but never like seriously pursued those things. But this creative coding really just came more naturally because I kind of had all the tools, like the tool set under my belt already. I already knew how to code, so it was easy to just start doing it. I had to learn a whole new skill set um, in the same way as other artistic mediums. So it was a lot of fun for me just to actually get results rather than spending years trying to get what I was going for.
Well, I would love to talk a bit about the Truth exhibition and your piece Metamosaic. I think it would probably help if I started with grounding the question in a blurb from the curatorial statement.
Mhm.
Just because I know it's been a little while probably since you've revisited it. So here's just a quick blurb from Adam Berninger's curatorial vision for the Truth exhibition. So the show is about exploring our perception of scale from the microscopic to the cosmic, where artists are using various abstract forms to look at the fibers of our universe, either obscuring and uniting the differences between the macro and the micro, and inviting a perceived sameness across these scales. What really resonates with you about this curatorial vision, curatorial statement?
With abstract art, especially, um, there's not always like a real meaning just looking at it. Like there's always something deeper to it. And so I think with all of these pieces, there's some hidden meaning that you can't really see just at face value. They either have to make up or kind of discover. And all these pieces, you have these different, at least with mine, like there's all these different scales of elements in the work. And you've got these really small details and larger ones, and they kind of relate to each other, but there's randomness involved. So there's kind of this underlying, if you want to call it truth, to it that is there.
I love the color and the aesthetic choices that you made for this piece. So can you tell us a bit about how you arrived at those, and if there was some process along the way that kind of shaped your that shaped this eventual piece?
Yeah, well, it started with me just sending some ideas to Adam for a collaboration that we were thinking about months ago, like early this year. Just some pretty early sketches I had worked on, and it was very different looking than what it is now. There were no boxes. It was more smooth, swirly shapes. And just after months of going back and forth between different projects and just saying what we did and didn't like about it, we kind of arrived at this point of totally distorting and pixelating the image that was there before. So, like at the beginning of each, like the underlying image of each piece is a very, I guess, organic looking swirling background, but then it's adding all these layers and layers of boxes and really distorting the image. So in the end, it doesn't look like there's much of a cohesive image, but you can kind of see these little patterns of colors and shapes that are kind of related, but that overall image is kind of hidden behind it.
It really does have this sort of effect of static, like it kind of is resonating with like an old TV screen, how they would get the static across, and you knew that there was something going on underneath, but you
Mhm.
couldn't quite tell because of the static and the pixelation. That totally tracks.
I did kind of go off on a totally different path at first and worked on that for on and off for a couple months and didn't really go where I was hoping it would go. And then kind of jumped back to this previous point from months earlier and took a totally opposite direction. So, yeah, there's definitely lots of ways you can go, especially the earlier on in the project. You can really go in completely different directions. Yeah, this was a very different work than a lot of my other stuff. A lot of my other projects are, you could kind of imagine that they were hand drawn or more traditionally made and not code based, but this was definitely a very different direction, really leaning into these squares that are very pixelated and digital looking. It's funny because I was actually considering releasing this project at some point under like a pseudonym, like a different account, because it was a very different aesthetic, but Adam kind of encouraged me to release it as myself and kind of show that I can do something a little different. And yeah, we worked with this idea of these really small micro details and these kind of large rectangles that really uh, play with each other. So you've got these areas where you've got large areas of sometimes almost solid colors, and then these really pixelated like details that you can almost make out what's underneath it.
For those of our in our community, we've heard that some people like to dig a little bit more into the technical aspects and sort of like the process and more of the like nuts and bolts of the coding. And um, is there anything you'd like to share kind of about digging deeper into the process? You have this extensive background in computer science, and your proficiency with code, you know, um, is, I'm sure, quite deep. And so I'm wondering if there's anything you'd like to speak about in terms of your technical process with this work. And I'm just gonna make a disclaimer that I can try to keep up. Can't promise I'll be able to, but I'll certainly try.
Yeah, I mean, so that base image that I was talking about, these kind of more organic swirly shapes that are in the background that it starts with, um, that's all done with shaders, which is something somewhat new to my toolkit. So that's using domain warping is the technique that it's called, which a lot of other generative artists are using. So that gets these really nice swirling shapes that are pretty random looking, but can also be modified to be pretty different than what you're seeing elsewhere. So it's starting with that, and then I'm basically pixelating it in different ways. So you've got some areas that get very pixelated with fine details with small squares, and then some that get replaced with these larger solid colors, solid areas of color. And then once I've got that, I'm taking the palette that I'm working with and then just adding all of these boxes on top of it and kind of blending them in different ways with that base image and stacking them. So you've got, lots of layers of these boxes all stacked up on this original image. So it's probably 10 of layers of those of different sizes and covering different parts of the screen. So you get these areas where you've got only small ones, only large ones, a mix of both. So basically I was running into issues where the things I wanted to do just take way too long to load. And shaders are really powerful in that they let you do really complex stuff really quickly. It's a totally different language that you have to learn and a totally different way of thinking, because instead of just saying, draw a box here in this color, you have to think about basically the pixel level. So it's a very different mindset that you have to work in, but can be very powerful. And I think a lot of artists are starting to realize that it's definitely something they need to at least be aware of and start learning.
So I'd like to take a step back and looking at the project as a whole. And I'm wondering what you've learned and what you think you'll take away from this work and this experience. You've mentioned that you're thinking about even releasing this piece under a pseudonym, and so that's quite a decision to not do that and to release it under your own name. And so I'm curious what you've learned and what you think you'll take away from this exhibition. I know we haven't opened yet, but by the time this comes out, it will have opened. So that could change this, your answer to this could change as well.
I think leaning more into that digital aesthetic, not being afraid of embracing squares and pixel looking things. Because I have tried to kind of avoid that in the past, not for any particular reason, but just thinking that I had to stay in a certain sort of aesthetic before. So I think it's going to teach me to explore not necessarily more digital, but just different kind of looks for my own work and not be afraid of doing something totally different that people might not be as used to with me, and just doing what I think I want to make instead.
There really is a freedom to coding and generative art.
Mm-hmm.
Just so interesting because you have to pay such close attention to the constraints, and
Mm-hmm.
you really do create this very closed system that then has so much power.
Yeah, you have to kind of set the ground rules and make sure you don't get anything too crazy or broken or anything like that. But once you have that set up and you have enough different factors of randomness involved, you're really getting something completely unique every time.